Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Roger Brooks, author of The Sacred Order, that is scheduled to be released in 2020. Roger, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
And from my understanding, this is your fifth book. Is that correct?
Yes, technically it is. It's my fourth book. But it's my first book of fiction. So in many ways, it's my first novel.
Excellent. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Question number one: what is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Well, that answer comes easy because it's something I had to learn, and that is patience. Especially writing a novel, to have patience and let the book itself breathe, if you will. It takes on a life of its own. And our subconscious, or as I like to call, as my coach taught me, the creative unconscious, really needs time to work, especially for first-time authors like myself, writing a book of fiction, because it's not something we're used to doing. So I would say definitely having patience in allowing the book to come through you, and allowing the characters to come to life, and allowing yourself to really dive in and become, each character as you write them, and as the book itself, comes to fruition.
And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
Well, to be honest, I thought a lot about the topic when I first started writing the book. So I wrote a business book back about 10 years ago, and that book was published by Entrepreneur Press. And it was a good relationship. I enjoyed the experience of getting published by a business publishing house. But a book of fiction is a bit different in that I've come to realize that you really cannot think about the publishing process until the book is done. So even though the manuscript is done, I am now in the process of final edits and then going to the publisher. So not going prematurely and really taking the time, because we all know innately, when the book is ready, especially after some time reviewing it. And, for me, it's actually been 7 years, so it's been a really long process, and just knowing when the time is right. So it's hard for me to give advice on a book of fiction with a publisher at this point because I haven't gone that deep. But at the same time, I'm confident going into it because I know the book is now ready. It's now ready for a publisher to review. It's now a page turner, where a year ago, 2 years ago, when I wanted to get it out, it really wasn't ready. So again, learning that patience and then making sure that the book is in the best possible place that it can be before you put it in the hands of any publishers.
Well, let's talk about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launches that has worked well.
Well, the world is changing a lot. So there's things that I did back, going back, say, a decade, that may not necessarily work today. So, for example, in my local area, I did a book launch. We had a release party. We had, probably 150 people that came. We sold a lot of books that night. And then, I did a lot of book signings, and those type of things worked well at that time. But today, and I also help other authors, so I could speak to this firsthand, today, with the wonderful technology that we have at our fingertips, and the social media platforms that exist and are, grossly underutilized, I think, especially by authors, and the pricing is so amazingly incredible at this point. Authors need to take advantage of it, through Facebook, through Instagram, through LinkedIn, being able to find your readership based on your niche, based on the type of reader that you're going after. So I would say now, in this day and age, and I'm going to work really hard on this going into, next year when I plan to put the book out, is to be, very intentional about your social media, building your brand, building your network, so that the people closest to you, that are in your network, could have first dibs on your book, but then taking it beyond that and just advertising and broadcasting it out to the world, again, based on your niche, because the social media tools are so precise today that, we are now able to get in front of the right buyers.
So you talk about building your network. So what particular strategies do you plan to implement with that?
Well, one of the things is what you're doing. I think every author should have their own podcast.
Yep.
Why not? Why wouldn't you want to have that, as part of your overall platform? It doesn't have to be the only thing you do, but it could be one thing that you do. And here we are, you and I are talking. I'm in New York, you're in Texas. We're having a great conversation, but we're building content right now as we speak. And that's something I don't think people are doing enough of. And they may be intimidated, but as you know and as I know, having your own podcast is crucial today. You are able to speak your voice. You're able to have, other authors on. You're able to, have a guest publisher on. There's a lot of things you could do to promote your book through your own podcast. So I would say definitely podcasting is one thing to build your brand. And then don't be afraid to think big and go big. I started a podcast a couple of years ago, and it's now really starting to take off. But it's that consistency of putting out a show every week and, reaching more and more people. Even if it's 25, 50 people a week, you're starting to build this network, because it really doesn't take as much as we might think to get maybe, say, our 1,000 true fans that we know will buy our products and services. So I would say, continue to think about innovative ways to grow your brand. Continue to make posts on LinkedIn. Use everything that's out there. Instagram. Do your podcast. And I feel that is what we have to do today in order to stand out above the rest, because there's so many books that come out every single day.
Well, speaking of books, I'd like to ask you about your favorite book and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Oh, wow. I didn't used to be, but over the last, say, 5 to 7 years, I'm a pretty devoted reader. And it's a hard question. I'm going to go out on a limb here. I would say the book that has helped me the most is actually a very old book. And I was turned on to this book by a gentleman, David Nagel, who has his own podcast called the Successful Mind Podcast. And the name of the book is called The Science of Getting Rich. The Science of Getting Rich. And it's by a gentleman, Wallace Wattles. And the title may be a bit deceiving, because although it is about the way, his way of getting to a place where you can be, financially free, it's a lot deeper than that. It's actually pretty spiritual in how you go about the way of doing things. And that's exactly what he says in the books. In his book is, doing things in a certain way. And when we do things in a certain way and we think in a certain way, then we're able to act in a certain way, and things just start to happen. Doors start to open for you. And it just, it actually sat on my desk for about a year before I read it. And I'm so glad I did, because it expanded my mind that much more. And I go back and I read it periodically. And it's interesting, because if I may just say this one last point here about this question, is that the book was written, as I mentioned, in 1910. And he talks about thinking outside of the box. And this is relevant to our conversation about authors, is that we have to reinvent. We have to think outside of the box. And this is when trains were the main, form of mass transportation back then. And he talks about how someday, let's look to the air. Maybe we could look to the air, and that's where our transportation will take place. So, again, being able to look back on an author, that wrote a book over 100 years ago, very forward thinking, it made a really big impact on me. And I hope some of your listeners pick up this book on Amazon. It's, probably $10, called The Science of Getting Rich.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
Favorite quote. I have several of them. I'm going to just think for a moment here, though, because I love this quote, and it's this: there are two ways of spreading light: to be the candle or the mirror that reflects it. And I think that's relevant to life. Are we going to look at the reflection in the mirror, or are we going to live as a person who we really are and who we're meant to be?
Excellent. Well, Roger, I want to thank you for being a guest on this show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. The best way to reach me, you could find me on Facebook, Roger Brooks, or on my business page, American Real, REAL. You can also contact me at Roger, ROGER, at AmericanReal.tv. That is the podcast that I run. And be on the lookout. We're going to start our marketing campaign right after the first of the year for the Sacred Order. And Paul, I can't thank you enough, because you are actually the first person I'm talking to about my new book. And I'm happy to put it out there in the universe, and I really appreciate you.
Well, Roger, thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.